We need younger employees, more adaptable, less rigid. My name is Douglas. I am 55 years old, and I have spent the last 19 years building the backbone of TriTech Solutions here in Dayton, Ohio. The words hung in the air like smoke from a bad electrical fire. Gavin Norris sat across from me in his corner office, fingers drumming against his MacBook like he was typing code he would never understand. I had walked into this meeting thinking it was another quarterly review, same routine I had been through 76 times before. Instead, Gavin delivered what he called workforce optimization with the confidence of a man who had never spent a weekend fixing server crashes or explaining to panicked clients why their automated systems had gone dark. "You are great, Doug, but streamlining talent density is essential," he continued, adjusting his tie. Everything about him screamed expensive business school and zero field experience. "This is just business." I nodded. Did not argue. Did not slam my fist on his glass desk or remind him that I had trained half the people he was keeping. Just gathered my thoughts and replied, "Understood." But something cold settled in my chest as I walked back to my cubicle. For 19 years I had been the guy who made things work. When the server room flooded in 2018, I was the one who waded through ankle-deep water to salvage the backup drives. When our main client threatened to pull their contract over integration failures, I spent 3 straight nights rebuilding their entire workflow system from scratch. I had built proprietary scripts that automated vendor renewals, created internal bridges that connected incompatible software platforms, and documented critical processes in ways that only I understood, not out of spite or job security, out of necessity. The company had never invested in proper documentation protocols, so I had developed my own systems to keep everything running. As I packed my personal items into a cardboard box, I noticed Trevor from the help desk watching me with nervous eyes. He was 26, fresh out of college, and had been asking me for months to explain the back-end automation sequences. I had promised to train him properly when things slowed down. Now, there would be no time. "Hey, Douglas," he said quietly, "is this really happening?" I taped up the box and looked around the office one last time. Apparently so. What Trevor did not know, what none of them knew, was that Gavin had just fired the only person who understood how their entire infrastructure actually worked. The scripts, the automation, the vendor relationships, the emergency protocols. All of it lived in my head and in carefully encrypted files that required specific access credentials. I shook hands with a few colleagues and left without ceremony. 3 weeks later, everything started breaking. I had not set out to become indispensable. When I started at TriTech in 2005, it was supposed to be a temporary position while I figured out my next move. My wife Janet had passed away the year before, and I needed steady work with decent benefits to support my daughter Melissa through her final years of high school. The company was smaller then, 15 employees, basic IT services, nothing fancy. But I had 20 years of experience in systems integration from my previous job at an aerospace contractor, and I could see problems that others missed. The owner, Harold Winters, appreciated having someone who could think 3 steps ahead of disaster. Over the years, I became the unofficial backbone. When Harold sold the company to a larger regional firm in 2019, I stayed on because the work mattered and the people depended on me. I had built relationships with every major vendor, negotiated contracts that saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, and created automated systems that prevented the kind of catastrophic failures that could destroy client trust overnight. But I had also noticed warning signs over the past year. New management had brought in consultants who spoke in buzzwords and treated experienced employees like expensive liabilities. They hired younger staff at lower salaries and expected them to magically absorb decades of institutional knowledge through osmosis. Gavin Norris had arrived 6 months ago with credentials from some prestigious consulting firm and immediately began talking about right-sizing and optimizing human capital. He scheduled meetings with PowerPoint presentations that reduced complex technical operations to colorful pie charts. During one particularly frustrating session, He had suggested that our custom automation scripts could be easily replaced with off-the-shelf solutions. I had tried to explain why that would not work. Our client base required specialized integrations that standard software could not handle. The custom scripts I had written over the years were not just convenience tools. They were critical infrastructure that prevented system failures and data corruption. Gavin had nodded politely and made notes on his tablet, but I could tell he was not really listening. To him, I was just an aging employee with outdated skills and an inflated salary. What he failed to understand was that those outdated skills had been keeping his company operational for nearly 2 decades. The server room that never went down, the automated backups that never failed, the vendor relationships that ensured priority support during emergencies. All of that existed because I had built redundancy into systems that other people took for granted. The subtle warning signs had been there for months. Fewer invitations to planning meetings, requests for detailed documentation of my daily tasks, questions about whether my responsibilities could be distributed among the team. I had assumed it was standard corporate reorganization. I had been wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after my termination. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reviewing job listings on my laptop, when Trevor's number appeared on my phone screen. "Douglas, I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a serious problem," he said. His voice was tight with panic. "The automated backup system failed last night, and none of us can figure out how to restart it manually." I set down my coffee cup. "What exactly happened?" "Everything was running fine until around 2 a.m. Then all the automated processes just stopped. Gavin brought in some consultants yesterday to review your old scripts, and they said they could optimize them. But now nothing works." Something cold settled in my stomach. "They modified the automation scripts?" "They said they were just cleaning up redundant code, but now the system will not accept the vendor credentials. The backup protocols are throwing error messages, and 3 clients have called this morning about data synchronization failures." I walked to my window and looked out at the quiet suburban street. For 19 years, I had built safeguards into every system to prevent exactly this kind of cascading failure. The scripts were not just functional code. They contained fail-safes, error-handling protocols, and recovery mechanisms that had been refined through years of trial and testing. "Douglas, is there any way you could walk us through the recovery process?" Trevor asked. "Gavin is in full panic mode. He keeps saying you must have sabotaged something before you left." I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not satisfaction exactly, but clarity. "Trevor, I never sabotaged anything, but I also never shared the administrative passwords for the core systems because nobody ever asked for a proper knowledge transfer." "What do you mean?" "The backup system requires specific vendor authentication codes that I negotiated directly with our service providers. The automation scripts reference encrypted configuration files that are locked behind access credentials I created for security purposes, and the manual recovery procedures are documented in files that require administrative privileges to access." There was silence on the other end of the line. "I spent 19 years building redundancy into every critical system," I continued. "But redundancy only works if someone knows how to implement it. Can you help us?" I looked at my laptop screen, where an email from Vector Core Systems was waiting in my inbox. They had offered me a senior integration specialist position with a 20% salary increase and genuine respect for my experience. "I appreciate you calling, Trevor, but I am no longer a TriTech employee," I said quietly. "You might want to suggest that Gavin contact the vendors directly. They will probably want to renegotiate the service contracts anyway." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time thinking about how quickly things could fall apart when you removed the wrong piece. The second call came 2 days later. This time it was Gavin himself. "Douglas, I think there may have been some miscommunication about your departure," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "We are experiencing some technical difficulties that could benefit from your expertise." I had been expecting this call. Word traveled fast in the Dayton tech community, and I had already heard through mutual contacts that TriTech was hemorrhaging clients faster than their IT team could provide explanations. "What kind of difficulties?" I asked. Nothing major, Gavin replied quickly. Just some integration issues with the automated systems. I was hoping you might be willing to consult on a temporary basis to help smooth the transition. I leaned back in my chair. Through my home office window, I could see my neighbor mowing his lawn with methodical precision. What does your current team think about the situation? Well, they are learning, but you obviously have institutional knowledge that could expedite the resolution process. What Gavin was not saying was that 3 of TriTech's 5 largest clients had already issued formal complaints about system failures, and 2 more were threatening to terminate their contracts. The consultants he had brought in to optimize my scripts had essentially broken every critical automation process, and now the company was running on manual procedures that nobody fully understood. I appreciate the offer, Gavin, but I've already accepted a position with VectorCore Systems, I said. I start Monday. There was a pause. VectorCore? But they are our direct competitor. They are a professional organization that values experienced personnel, I replied. The kind of company that understands the difference between optimization and destruction. Gavin's tone shifted. Douglas, I hope you understand that any proprietary information or trade secrets you developed at TriTech cannot be shared with competing firms. We have legal protections in place. I felt my jaw tighten. Are you threatening me? I am simply reminding you of your contractual obligations. And I should mention that if these current technical issues are the result of deliberate sabotage, there could be serious legal consequences. The accusation hung in the air like toxic smoke. For 19 years, I had protected this company from disasters that could have destroyed their reputation and cost them millions of dollars. I had worked weekends, holidays, and vacations to ensure their systems remained stable, and now Gavin was suggesting that I had deliberately sabotaged my own work. Gavin, let me be very clear about something, I said. I never sabotaged anything, but I also never had the opportunity to properly transfer critical system knowledge because you terminated my employment with 2 hours' notice. We provided standard documentation protocols. You provided a 20-minute exit interview where you asked me to write down my passwords on a sticky note, I replied. That is not documentation. That is negligence. After I hung up, I sat in my office thinking about how quickly respect could turn into desperation. Gavin had fired me for being outdated and inflexible. Now he was accusing me of sabotage because his bright new team could not understand systems they had dismissed as obsolete. But the truth was simpler than sabotage. I had built robust, secure systems that required specific knowledge to operate and maintain. When you remove the person who built and maintained those systems without proper knowledge transfer, you create single points of failure that can cascade into total operational breakdown. The irony was that Gavin's accusations were probably making the situation worse. If he was telling clients and vendors that a disgruntled former employee had sabotaged their systems, he was essentially admitting that their security and documentation protocols were inadequate. No enterprise client wants to hear that their service provider's infrastructure depends on the goodwill of terminated employees. I opened my laptop and began preparing for my first day at VectorCore Systems. They had hired me specifically because of my experience with complex integration challenges and my reputation for building reliable systems. They wanted to learn from my expertise, not replace it with cheaper alternatives. The full scope of the disaster became clear when I ran into Steve Harrison at the grocery store on Saturday morning. Steve was a project manager at Meridian Analytics, one of TriTech's oldest clients, and he looked like he had not slept in days. Douglas, thank God I found you, he said, abandoning his shopping cart to corner me near the produce section. Do you have any idea what is happening over at TriTech? I selected a bag of apples and tried to look casual. I would not know. I do not work there anymore. That is what I heard, and frankly, it explains a lot. Our entire data synchronization system has been down for 4 days. Every time we call for support, they tell us they are working on it, but nothing gets fixed. Yesterday, some consultant tried to convince us that the problem was on our end. Steve ran his hand through his hair. We have been with TriTech for 8 years. Never had a single major outage until this week. Now we are looking at potential contract penalties because we cannot deliver reports to our own clients. I felt a familiar weight in my chest. Meridian Analytics processed financial data for regional insurance companies. If their reporting systems were down, it created a domino effect that could impact thousands of policyholders and claims processors. "Steve, have you considered reaching out to other service providers?" I asked. "We are already in talks with 3 companies, including VectorCore Systems, but switching providers means rebuilding our entire integration architecture from scratch. Months of work, massive costs, and no guarantee that the new system will work as well as what we had." What Steve did not know was that the system he was praising had been my design. I had spent 2 years building custom integration protocols that allowed Meridian's legacy software to communicate seamlessly with TriTech's cloud infrastructure. The automation scripts handled data validation, error correction, and real-time synchronization without any manual intervention. But those scripts had been built using proprietary algorithms and security protocols that I had developed specifically for high-volume financial processing. They were not standard off-the-shelf solutions that any consultant could understand or modify without months of careful analysis. "Douglas, can I ask you something confidentially?" Steve said, lowering his voice. "Do you think this is permanent? Should we start looking for alternatives, or is there a chance TriTech can fix this?" I thought about Gavin's phone call, his accusations of sabotage, his threat of legal action. I thought about the consultants who had dismissed 19 years of institutional knowledge as redundant code. I thought about Trevor and the other junior staff members who were probably working around the clock trying to solve problems they had never been trained to handle. "Steve, I cannot advise you on your business decisions," I said. "But I will say this. Complex technical systems require continuity of knowledge and expertise. When you disrupt that continuity without proper transition planning, you create risks that can take months or years to fully resolve." Steve nodded grimly. "That is what I was afraid of." As I drove home, I realized that the situation was worse than I had initially understood. It was not just about broken scripts or failed automations. TriTech had built their entire business model around technical capabilities that depended on my expertise, and they had eliminated that expertise without understanding the consequences. Other clients would follow Meridian's lead. Word of mouth traveled fast in the regional business community, and nobody wanted to risk their operations on unreliable service providers. Gavin had tried to optimize costs by eliminating expensive senior talent, but he had actually destroyed the core value proposition that made TriTech competitive. Monday morning at VectorCore Systems felt like stepping into a parallel universe. Instead of cramped cubicles and outdated equipment, I found myself in a modern office with ergonomic workstations and enterprise-grade hardware. Instead of being dismissed as outdated, I was welcomed as a senior integration specialist whose experience could help them capture market opportunities. My new manager, Patricia Wells, had done her homework. She understood exactly what kind of value I could bring to their organization. "Douglas, we have been watching the situation at TriTech with great interest," she said during our first meeting. "Several of their clients have reached out to us about emergency migration services. We want to handle these opportunities properly, with full respect for intellectual property boundaries and professional ethics." I appreciated her directness. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" 3 clients have already requested formal proposals for complete system rebuilds. 2 more are asking for backup service arrangements while they evaluate their options. If we can demonstrate superior reliability and support, we could potentially capture most of TriTech's regional market share within 6 months. Patricia spread out project timelines on her conference table. "The key is building solutions that are genuinely better than what clients had before, not just copying existing approaches. We want to use your expertise to design next-generation integration architectures that will serve these clients for the next decade." This was exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had been missing at TriTech. Instead of viewing senior employees as expensive liabilities, VectorCore saw them as competitive advantages. Instead of trying to replace expertise with cheaper alternatives, they invested in building stronger capabilities. Over the following weeks, I worked with VectorCore's engineering team to develop integration proposals for former TriTech clients. We designed systems that were more robust, more secure, and more scalable than anything I had been able to build under TriTech's resource constraints. The irony was not lost on me. Gavin had fired me for being outdated and inflexible, but VectorCore was paying me 20% more to do essentially the same work at a higher level of sophistication. Meanwhile, the situation at TriTech continued to deteriorate. Trevor called me twice more, both times sounding increasingly desperate. Gavin had hired a series of consultants and emergency contractors, but none of them could fully restore the automated systems. Each attempted fix seemed to create new problems. They brought in some guy from Chicago who claims he can rebuild everything from scratch, Trevor told me. But he has been here for 2 weeks and nothing works better than when he started. I felt sorry for Trevor and the other junior staff members who were caught in the middle of this disaster. They were talented people who deserved better leadership and proper training opportunities. But I could not help them without potentially compromising my new position at VectorCore. Trevor, I wish I could offer advice, but you understand my situation, I said. Have you considered looking for opportunities at other companies? Actually, yes. Patricia Wells called me last week about a junior integration specialist position at VectorCore. She said you had recommended me. I smiled. Patricia had asked me to identify talented individuals from my former workplace who might be interested in new opportunities. I had mentioned Trevor specifically because of his work ethic and willingness to learn. VectorCore is a good company, I said. They invest in their people instead of treating them as disposable resources. By the end of my first month at VectorCore, we had signed contracts with 2 former TriTech clients and were finalizing proposals for 3 more. The migration projects would take months to complete, but the client relationships were already secured based on demonstrations of superior technical capabilities and professional support. The call came on a Friday afternoon in November, exactly 3 months after my termination from TriTech. I was reviewing integration specifications for a new client when Patricia knocked on my office door. Douglas, Gavin Norris is online too, she said with a slight smile. He says it is urgent. I picked up the phone. This is Douglas. Douglas, I am calling to inform you that TriTech Solutions has been acquired by Meridian Analytics, Gavin said without preamble. His voice was flat, defeated. The acquisition includes all assets, client contracts, and intellectual property, effective immediately. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Congratulations. That sounds like a significant development. The new ownership has requested a comprehensive audit of all technical systems and operational procedures, Gavin continued. During that process, certain deficiencies have been identified in our current infrastructure and support capabilities. What he was not saying was that Meridian Analytics had grown tired of waiting for TriTech to fix their broken systems and had decided to buy the company outright rather than terminate their service contract. It was probably cheaper than the legal fees they would have incurred fighting breach of contract claims. I see, I replied. The new management team has specifically requested that you be contacted about returning to oversee the technical transition process, Gavin said. They are prepared to offer you a senior director position with full authority over systems integration and vendor relationships. I looked out my office window at the VectorCore parking lot, where my colleagues were heading home for the weekend. Good people doing meaningful work in an environment that valued their contributions. That is an interesting offer, Gavin. But I am quite happy in my current position, I said. VectorCore has been very supportive of my professional development. There was a long pause. Douglas, I want you to know that I realize mistakes were made in how your departure was handled. If you were willing to return, we could discuss significant compensation adjustments and improved working conditions. For 19 years, I had kept TriTech's systems running smoothly while management took the credit and collected the profits. Now that their short-sighted cost-cutting measures had nearly destroyed the company, they wanted me to come back and fix their mistakes. Gavin, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but some decisions cannot be undone, I said. I hope the transition goes smoothly for everyone involved. 6 months later, I was sitting in my Vector Core office reviewing quarterly performance reports when Patricia stopped by with a bottle of champagne. "Congratulations, Douglas," she said, setting the bottle on my desk. "The board just approved your promotion to Chief Integration Officer. Your team has successfully migrated 12 former TriTech clients to our platform, and client satisfaction scores are at an all-time high." I smiled and shook her hand. "Thank you. It has been a rewarding experience." What Patricia did not mention was that VectorCore had essentially absorbed TriTech's entire regional market share within 8 months. The acquisition by Meridian Analytics had stabilized TriTech's operations temporarily, but most clients had already made the decision to switch to more reliable service providers. Trevor had joined VectorCore's integration team 4 months earlier and was rapidly developing into a skilled systems specialist. He brought fresh perspectives that complemented my experience, and we worked well together on complex migration projects. The irony was that I was now doing exactly the same work I had done at TriTech, but with better resources, more supportive management, and significantly higher compensation. VectorCore understood that experienced technical professionals were assets to be nurtured, not expenses to be minimized. Last week I had driven past the old TriTech office building and noticed that half the parking spaces were empty. The company still existed under Meridian's ownership, but it was a shadow of what it had been during my 19 years there. I no longer felt anger about Gavin's decision to terminate my employment. His short-sighted approach to workforce optimization had actually created the opportunity for me to find a better position with a company that appreciated my contributions. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being successful somewhere else. In the end, competence always finds its proper value, and I had finally found mine.